America's changing identity. The Second Great Awakening of the 1820s and 30s once again made America a religious nation and instilled Christian values into the American public, which were used in the fight against slavery. During this time, ministers preached sobriety and temperance, an idea reinforced by the Women's Christian Temperance Union. Though this is when the movement for temperance became popular and widespread, it wasn't truly successful until the Prohibition movement in the 1920s, which was later repealed in 1933. Women began to have a more active role in society during this time, beginning with their involvement in the temperance movement. They began to move out of their traditional roles as homemakers. In 1920, with the ratification of the 19th Amendment, women gained the right to vote, which was one of the first major steps in achieving equality. In the 1920s, many women known as flappers began to become more adventurous and independent and challenged the social norms and freedoms of women at the time. During World War I and World War II, women took over factory jobs while men were away, and this gave them a more equal standing in society because they saw themselves as men's equals. When the men came back from the war, they were supposed to give the jobs back to the men, but instead they protested, which gave them even more power. After the abolition of slavery, African Americans very slowly advanced in society. However, it wasn't till World War II that they really had very many opportunities, which were found in wartime jobs. Even then, during World War I and World War II, African Americans drafted in the war fought what was called the Double V campaign, which meant that they fought fascists abroad but racism at home. Also during this time, the Chinese Exclusion Act barred nearly all Chinese from America for 6 decades. The Chinese already in America became a new generation of Chinese Americans, and many Chinese suffered extreme discrimination. After the bombing of Pearl Harbor, many Japanese Americans also suffered from discrimination and less than ideal living conditions in Japanese internment camps, where they were relocated in an effort to minimize the threat of Japanese attack. Directly following World War II, however, the U.S. saw an increase in immigration, assimilation, and diversity because of the better economic and political stability found in the U.S. compared to other countries such as Germany after World War II. After the Civil War, the Industrial Revolution led to the movement from south to the north and from more rural areas and farming jobs to factory jobs in the cities. Robber barons also at this time were a small minority of the population but held the majority of the wealth. The working class was living in poverty for the most part. Because of this, many farmers and laborers formed the Populist Party, and during this time, unions gained popularity and helped unite workers and gave them a small degree of power. The establishment of progressive-era reforms such as minimum wage helped to stabilize jobs and life in general for many workers. At the end of the 19th century, there was a move from the east to the west because of the expansion of railroads and farming. After the Civil War and Reconstruction, many former slaves, now free African Americans, moved north for work. Those that stayed in the South usually became sharecroppers and still experienced the class divide. However, those living in the North assimilated into the middle class. During World War I and World War II and the Great Migration, many African Americans moved to northern and western cities for wartime jobs. During the Great Depression, a mass migration of families was seen because many were looking for work. Males moved west and females followed, looking to fill any role that was needed. Many of the debates over national identity stem from what it means to be an American. By the end of World War II, America, in the scheme of things, was seen as a relative place of economic prosperity and opportunity, as well as diversity, where most anyone could have the hope to make a name and a future for themselves. To be an American, you no longer necessarily had to be white and of the middle to high class, but rather it meant that no matter your class, race, ethnicity, gender, etc., you had the opportunity for freedom.